Good afternoon to our viewers in Switzerland and good morning to those of you connecting from overseas. Apologies for this delay, which is nobody's fault. As your host, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you in the name of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland. It's nice to see that many of you are regular participants connected on this occasion, but I also want to extend a special welcome to the constituents of the Swedish-Swiss Chamber of Commerce and the Swiss-Asian Chamber of Commerce, who are also joining us for this webinar, A Nation Divided and the Global Reset, the Political Landscape under Trump 2.0. Since President Trump's return to office in January 2025, the United States has experienced profound political shifts marked by deepening domestic polarization and an ongoing recalibration of its foreign policy. Partisan divisions have intensified, fueling debates on governance, social policies, and democracy. Meanwhile, US foreign relations are undergoing significant changes as we speak, with a renewed focus on economic nationalism, shifting alliances, and a more offensive stance on global trade and security. In this webinar, we want to try and understand the dynamics and priorities behind some of the presidential decisions and actions, explore the global implications, and discuss what may lie ahead. To help us in this process, we have invited a top expert. He is a senior global fellow at Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, a former US ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and a former undersecretary of the US Army, to name just a few of the important functions from his impressive biography. He has worked at both the House and the Senate, the Department of Defense and the Department of State, again, just to mention a few. He served under 5 US presidents, the last being President Obama. In 2020, he already honored us by accepting to be our webinar speaker for the first time, and we are thrilled that he agreed to be with us again today. Although we don't see him, he can hear us, and I hope you will all be able to hear him. A warm welcome, Dr. Joseph Westphal.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I'm so sorry about this glitch in the video. I promise you I'm looking very sharp today with my suit and my tie and
very good.
All the good wishes.
Thank you. We might not be sitting here with you, Dr. Westphal, had we not been introduced 5 years ago by our president, Linda Walker von Grafenried, your longtime friend and a citizen of the world par excellence, who is kind enough to say a few personal introductory remarks in just a second. Wonderful to have you with us, Linda. The webinar will be moderated by our former president, now honorary chairman of LATCAM, and another citizen of the world who has strong family and business ties on both the European and the American continents, Ramon Esteve. A warm welcome to you too, Ramon. Good to see you.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Before we start, I want to mention to our first-time viewers that this webinar is recorded, and the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, LATCAM Switzerland. Closer to the end of the webinar, we will give you the possibility to ask questions. Please write them in the Q&A section. I will take them by order. If it makes you more comfortable, you can submit your question anonymously. And now, Linda, then Ramon, the floor is yours.
Okay, dear Joe, dear colleagues, it is with great pleasure that we have Professor Dr. Joseph Westphal as our speaker today. Joe has been a friend since we met in La Paz, of all places, Bolivia, in 1990. Since then, Joe has had an amazing and I would say thrilling career, having, as Tatiana mentioned before, worked for 5 different US presidents. One of Joe's daughters actually lived in Zurich as her husband was conducting liver transplants at the University of Zurich. Thus, Joe has a certain affinity to Switzerland. Thank you, dear Joe, for sharing your vast experience and knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much.
Ramon, to you now, please. Unmute yourself.
Yes, Professor Westphal, good morning. I guess they chose me as moderator because I'm one of the more bewildered persons in this chamber. Maybe a little bit because I am a world citizen, like Tatiana was saying. To start, I would suggest we go back to the little flyer we got announcing this webinar that had some key questions. Namely, how has government changed under Trump's second term? And what implications are there for democracy, the economy, and global stability? What would be your opinion on these introductory questions that we had? Whoops. Hey, I got kicked out. I'm out.
Me?
Linda, we can still, Ramon, we can still hear you and see you.
Okay, well, I'm back now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just like to ask you both to be on mute while Professor Westphal is speaking,
because
otherwise
there
we
is
have a
an
lot
echo.
of noise.
I cannot hear the Professor Westphal. I don't know if the other participants can.
I can hear you very well. Could the participants please write me in the chat whether you can hear our speaker?
I'll keep on talking.
Yes, I think that's probably best. I have not heard that anybody is not hearing you. So why don't you go ahead?
I don't hear much.
Should we try to postpone this and get this resolved somehow?
This is unseen and unheard in 5 years. In fact, we still have 75 participants connected, but I don't see that anyone is responding.
We're not using Signal, are we?
I don't know.
No.
Ouais, salut. Oh, merde. Ouais, dis-moi. Tatiana, apparently when you mute yourself, we lose the professor. Somebody has made that link.
Really? Well, that
Yeah.
is strange.
Recording in progress.
I still cannot hear him.
Well, I'm back on.
Yeah, there. Okay.
With the
There.
screen, but I can't. But I'm still not on the video.
No, I can hear you now, Professor. I don't know if the others can.
Let's get off the phone, Dr. Westphal, and see whether we can hear you on the screen. I'm going to switch off the phone now. Can you hear us? Can we hear you? No. Doesn't seem to be working. Ramon, any ideas?
My idea came from one of our listeners. Let me check.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, got it? Okay.
Got it.
Try to start again.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. So I will call him again on the phone. And I will not put myself on mute so that everybody can hear. Yes, Dr. Westphal, me again. Shall we try one more time over the phone?
Okay.
Now it seems that you can be heard, so why don't we start one more time, please? With the question that Ramon asked. Would you like Ramon to repeat the question? Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Would you like to start again with the question that Ramon asked? Shall he repeat the question? Hello? Hello?
Are you, Tatiana, are you talking to me?
Yes. I wanted to ask whether you want to start again with the question that Ramon just asked.
Okay, I can.
Okay, let's try.
Okay. I think it would be a good idea, Tatiana. I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you could ask someone who's in the audience to send a chat that they could hear this is working for them. And it's not just the three of us.
Well, I see a lot of comments in the Q&A.
It is working for them. There's a lot of
That
thumbs
it's
up
working.
coming.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, first of all, that I've had a lot of conversations recently with colleagues. In fact, this week I was in Washington meeting with several members and friends of mine in the Congress and in the previous administration as well. And we are all feel that in some ways, those of us who've been in government for a long time, that we are reliving some history here. the second, first of all, to understand Trump, of course, you have to understand that unlike many other presidents, he is a very different kind of leader. He is a disruptor. He is a deal maker. He doesn't have a strategic vision, and he doesn't have any kind of allegiance or commitment to the old world order that we have lived in since World War II. We tend to compare him a lot to Ronald Reagan, and I worked for Ronald Reagan. And there are, in fact, so many similarities, except in the personality. Personalities are very different. So their view of government, for example, is that government is generally not the answer, not the solution to our problems. Reagan's inaugural address, he said, in this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. And that's exactly what in his second term, Trump is trying to implement, is to move away from government as a solution to our problems, tear the government down as much as possible, and restructure it in a different capacity, with a different way of thinking about the future. The days in which the United States would extend its values, its human rights, generosity, its partnership, its sense of liberty and justice and rule of law are really inconsequential to the team that he put together in this second term. And Ramon, you asked, I'll stop here, you asked what's different between the first term and the second term. He began his first term by appointing a whole host of people that were pretty much traditionalists, who have been part of the established rule of law and order in this country for a long time. But slowly, those people either became disenfranchised or disassociated with his view of the world and his way of behaving, that most of them were fired or left. In this term, he decided, I think, clearly that those are not the people he wants. He doesn't want experienced people, whether they're in the military or in diplomacy or in any other area. He wants people who are totally loyal to him, totally loyal to his commitment, and who believe in the work that was done by this was done. I'm trying to think of the word here. They put together this agenda for 2025, Project 2025, which is very controversial. And he is essentially, with all his executive orders, he brought in people who support this agenda, and he is slowly but meticulously going through it. And even though he said he didn't support it, he's in fact supporting it.
So you said that Trump is a dealer but doesn't necessarily have a strategic vision, except for this Project 2025. So I guess my second question is kind of moot, which was, what does done look like for the Trump administration, besides what's in Project 2025?
Right. Good question. What I meant to say is that he's not a strategic thinker when it comes to international affairs, world affairs, the global environment. He has no vision for that. His vision is totally on the economic side. The implementation of tariffs, using tariffs as a way of trading with other countries, policies and behaviors. The strategy of implementing what's in Project 2025 is also very, very much not strategically put together. It's sort of by the seat of his pants. In other words, whatever they decide to do that particular day, they put out an executive order or put out a message in through social, and that's it. So there's no real sense of how you really get to this. We brought in Musk to try to eliminate as much of the government bureaucracy as they could. And now you have what we consider in this country basically a constitutional crisis, because he's doing things that in the past the courts and the Congress have not accepted. For example, let me give you an example from that. Back in the Nixon administration, Nixon, had a period of great inflation in the United States that he was dealing with, and he was, of course, opposed to a lot of things that Congress had been passing. Now, the Congress at that time was a primarily Democratic majority in Congress. They were passing laws that Nixon necessarily agree with, or spending resources on things that he didn't agree with. So he basically decided to impound funds. In other words, he directed OMB not to spend the money that Congress had appropriated and approved for these programs. One example of that was the case of money used for water treatment plants and water quality in the state. So the state of New York sued, and the court, and it went to the process through the court and the Court of Appeals, and they all decided the president was wrong, and it finally went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in a very famous decision called Payne versus City of New York, decided that the president did not have the right to withhold spending, that this was only the right of the Congress, and that he had to spend the money, and he couldn't impound the funds. A second example of that was used by Bill Clinton, who decided to use the line item veto, where he basically said, I'm not going to veto the whole bill when Congress passes, but I don't like this particular section, and I don't like spending in this particular area, so I'm going to line item veto this section. The Supreme Court again was, came before the court, Clinton versus the City of New York again, and this time the court again decided the president does not have the right to line item veto. So what you have today is you're waiting to see what the Supreme Court will eventually decide on all of this. These cases that are now before the district court are going to appellate court, and eventually will end up in the Supreme Court. And the other question is what Congress is going to do. Of course, he has a majority in the Congress, but a very slim majority. And will that hold? And will they allow him to go ahead and decide what he wants to implement that Congress approves and what he doesn't want to implement? So we're in a bit of a constitutional crisis. And the crisis will get worse if the Supreme Court, for example, were to decide that the president is illegally eliminating these positions from the administration, or eliminating a department like the Department of Education, or doing away with regulations that Congress approved, and the court decides against the president and decides that he must comply. What if he doesn't comply? What if he doesn't do it? Because he's the enforcer of the law. In the case of Nixon, in the case of Clinton, they accepted the court's jurisdiction and its decisions. Will Trump accept it? That's a big question.
Yeah, because the court has already granted him this broad immunity. So what stick is there except impeachment by Congress, which for the moment sides with him?
I don't think that decision on immunity would deter the court from finding that he doesn't have to comply with the acts of Congress. I think this is a different matter from that particular decision. So I think that it's going to be interesting how this court will rest with. I suspect that with the makeup of the court today and the decisions that they've already made, that this will not go well for President Trump.
Okay. Ah, la, la. A lot of uncertainty.
Oh, look at that! I think my video came on.
Yes.
There you are. How about that?
Maybe we can test.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can
Yeah,
now
we can
switch
hear
off
you.
the phone.
Perfect.
Can
you
you
hear
hear
me through
us,
the
Dr. Westphal?
Can you hear me through the video?
Yes,
Perfectly,
we can
yes.
hear you. I actually found the error. You were registered double as a participant and as a speaker, and the system did not recognize this. So
Ah,
now
okay.
we can continue with a better audio quality, and sorry about that again.
Yeah,
But let's continue.
that's modern technology.
Yeah.
In the last little exchange we had, you mentioned tariffs. I think most of the issues Trump has been working with are primarily domestic. Tariffs affect us all. Do you see these mainly as a tactic to extract concessions, especially from friendly countries like Mexico and Canada, which seem to be getting higher tariffs than the rest of us? Or do you think Project 2025 has some kind of mercantilist view where they want to go back with tariffs to fund the government rather than personal and corporate taxation?
Yeah, that's again, very good question, Ramon. I believe that the latter. I believe that he's not really using these as a bargaining chip. I think he is using them to basically, grow the income of the United States through these tariffs and rebuild our manufacturing capability. Which I think is everybody who's spoken to this has agreed that this is a big mistake. Our biggest contribution to the world economy is through services. Our biggest part of our economy is services, as it is becoming the same in many countries in Europe, in your part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So investing in manufacturing, it just doesn't make much sense. Manufacturing is so international now. Just take an automobile. An automobile is not just made in Mexico or just made in the United States. They're made from parts that come from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. It's true. True.
So I think that's going to be a little. That's not gonna suffice. And I think what's going to happen is that inflation's going to grow, the economy's going to be weakened, and I think people will realize that this is not going to be in their best interest and overall. And then the pressure will come on Congress, and it's already beginning to happen there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe a more tragic aspect of world affairs is the various peace initiatives we have. There's a total dissymmetry under what he's promoting in the Middle East compared to what he's promoting with Russia in Ukraine. What can be the ultimate strategy between? I mean, I don't know what he's trying to achieve in Ukraine. He wants to have access to these minerals, which the Russians can give him too if they controlled Ukraine. What's he trying to do in the Middle East? Promoting just about anything Mr. Netanyahu wants to do. It's, I don't know, it seems like he has picked sides. How do you view the two conflicts? Are there any parallels between his peace strategy?
I just don't think that he has a strategy when it comes to foreign affairs, international relations. I think it's a mishmash of whatever consequences he thinks he wants to impart on those that disagree with him or those who don't necessarily want to kowtow to his beliefs. The evidence in that conversation that he had with Zelensky in the White House, which was just awful, um, indicates that he doesn't really have a sense of how do you really solve these international problems. You have a country invading another country, yet he thinks he can just negotiate a peace through some type of edict. It doesn't make any sense. I just don't think his view of the world is very different. We go in this country, we've gone in these cycles, Ramon. I sort of view it this way. We went through the Great Depression, and in came FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Roosevelt implemented a New Deal, and it was a very comprehensive effort to try to move the United States and the population away from this depression and into an economic improvement. And then the war, of course, also contributed to that because it increased productivity and jobs and opportunity for people. And so we went through that whole period. And then comes Ronald Reagan, and we have another very significant change in the direction of the country. We get away from that global view of FDR and the previous administrations, and we move into an America first. I mean, the term "Make America Great Again" was coined by Ronald Reagan. He used it it was one of the first things he said in his first speech as he was campaigning for president. In New York Harbor, he gave that speech, "Make America Great Again." And he believed he was opposed to a lot of the social um, progress that the country was trying to make with respect to race relations. He went to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and basically pretty much indicated that he was not really in favor of total integration. Um, didn't say I favored segregation, but pretty much told the Southerners, you vote for me, and you're not going to have to worry about the South changing. Reagan came to office with the idea that he wanted to eliminate as much regulation onto the private sector. He wanted to eliminate the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Education. He wanted to reduce regulation. He wanted to increase defense spending. He thought that Carter and others had really weakened defense. So he wanted to really increase defense spending. He wanted to change monetary policy, and he wanted to reduce taxation. These are all the same things that Trump has proposed both in his first term and in his second term, especially now in the second term. So
I guess it's a question of style because I've never associated Reagan with Trump. I guess it's his way of
it's
presenting.
totally
Yeah.
style. What did they call him? The smiling. He delivered his message with a smile, where
Mhm.
Trump's delivered it with insults and accusations and uh, lies a lot of times. So
Yeah.
it's a very different style, but from the standpoint of how they how they view the world. And of course, Reagan was a fierce anti-communist who wanted to really eliminate the influence of the Soviet Union. Um, and so it was a different type of situation. There was, the balance of power was different back then. Today, I think the Trump view, or certainly of his people, is that they're going to be basically the balance of power is going to be between three major forces: the United States, Russia, and China. And the rest
Mhm.
of the world doesn't count.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that gets to my next question on Europe. I mean, Europe for Trump, it's not only does it seem it doesn't count, he also sees them as some kind of a threat, which I don't know why. Uh, it's surprising to me.
um, I think he's just not, I don't think he sees Europe as a threat. I just think he thinks Europe is inconsequential. It doesn't
Hmm.
really, it isn't going to be it's not an important variable in his view of the world. I
Hmm.
think his view of the world is it's us, it's Russia, and it's China. and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to work together or not work together, and the rest of the world is going to just adjust. I think like a lot of his people on his team have been quoted as saying that Europe is becoming irrelevant. The economy is not strong. It's just not. But I think Europe is going to surprise people by what's already beginning to happen.
I hope so.
I think it is. I think the fact that the
Yeah.
British Prime Minister has stood up to the president, very, very seriously. The French president has, as others have in Europe. I think you're going to see. Look what's going on in Germany as well. I think you're going to see a total different Europe this time, and a much more a stronger union
Yeah.
among those countries that you've never seen before.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned China, and what scenario, what's the ideal scenario for this administration with US-China relationships? I mean, to me, Trump seems more concerned about the economic relationship with China than he really does about their military threat to the whole Pacific region.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Totally agree with you. I don't think he is as concerned about what may happen with Taiwan as he is concerned about the trade relationship between the United States and China and how we can create a more favorable trade balance between the two countries.
mhm,
I think he should be concerned about China's growth in their defense posture and their continued building of their military. He should be concerned about that. He should be concerned about what they're doing in exploiting uh, smaller countries in Africa and around the world for minerals and resources that the Chinese need. But it doesn't seem to be a big priority of this administration.
no, it doesn't. It really seems very economics oriented. And well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can fix that with just tariffs, but we shall see. Um, One question, totally different subject, is energy policy in the US. Um, why this crusade against renewable energy? To me, renewable energy is just additional supply that can keep the overall cost of energy, be it fossil or whatever, down. Um, but he focuses on drill, baby, drill, and you know, renewables. They'd keep the bill down, that's for sure, but he doesn't seem to favor them at all. He wants to get rid of everything Biden did to favor renewables. I guess the only thing that keeps renewables alive is his friendship with Elon Musk.
Yeah, well, I just don't think that, and I think this has been the case with him all along. I don't think he believes necessarily in the idea that there is, in fact, a climate change problem that the world, but certainly our country, is facing. He just doesn't buy into that, and he doesn't see oil as declining in importance. I don't think he sees, electric vehicles being the solution, despite his love of Musk and now he's, promoting his cars. I don't think it's because he thinks that that's the future. I think the future,
Hmm.
he thinks it's really in the continued use of coal and oil and gas. And the U.S. is, of course, an exporter of oil.
Hmm.
And we have plenty of it. So we're not really suffering any shortages as in the past. We hardly import any. We do a little bit from Saudi Arabia, but that's it. And so I think he's surrounded himself or people who have come around to trying to gain his support are some of the big oil companies, some of the big energy companies that have a great stake in continued use of oil and coal.
Hmm.
And I think that's what he's just doing what he feels is the practical thing to do. He doesn't have the belief that we're headed for something, despite the fact that our climate is in fact so different, and it's really affecting us in an economic sense more than any other time in our history. I mean, we have violent storms literally every single week of the year.
Yeah.
When it used to be constrained to certain times only for certain parts of the country, now it's everywhere. You have tornadoes hitting us up here in the Northeast when they used to only be in little part of Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas. You've got rain and flooding and major storms causing hurricanes and so on. That's not a, that's that everybody agrees that that's a factor of climate and that we need to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just don't think that that's his belief, and I don't think he's gonna do much to go there. He's withdrawn from our climate treaties. He did that before in his first term.
Correct.
Probably
Yeah.
not going to rejoin those. And he's not going to use the international organizations like the UN or others to promote, a climate policy, a climate strategy that makes sense for the future.
Well, he certainly doesn't believe in multilateral organizations. He likes to
No,
deal
he
one
doesn't.
on one because he's the big guy, so he has the upper hand. So,
Right.
but energy being here in Switzerland, where we have probably the world's five largest independent oil traders, they're not drillers, they're companies that just trade oil. All of these companies are, in the last 5 years, have been investing massively in renewable, in metals, the metals that for batteries and transmission and whatever. And I don't know, the U.S. may be missing the boat, I think, but anyway. Time will tell who's right. I had
Yeah,
yeah.
we've made just one thing I would add. We've made a considerable amount of progress on renewables in this country. We've gone from literally zero to a tremendous growth across in terms of agriculture, in terms of manufacturing. I mean, we're using more and more renewables to support industry. So
Hmm.
I'm not sure why we're turning away from it. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It's
Yeah,
not.
and Texas has a lot of it, and it's one of the biggest oil
Yeah,
producers in the country. It has a
yeah,
lot of wind in Texas,
yeah.
so it is surprising his take on that. So, my last question before we open up the floor to our audience is a little bit philosophical. Is there any hope of returning to more balanced times? And how can governments, and it's not only a U.S. problem, I think it's in our democracies here in Europe, it's the same. How can governments rebuild trust? I mean, what do we need? What are the necessary steps? I mean, one of them is maybe fixing our media, which most people get their news from social media. It's extremely biased. I don't. I'm sort of at a loss to see how the governments can rebuild trust with the general public. I think it's particularly bad since the financial crisis of 2008 and getting worse.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to agree with you. I worry about that quite a bit, and I think you pointed to one of the things that's a real issue, and that is, both social media and technology in general. That we're going to have to adapt to a new way of thinking about how we do what you're suggesting. I think in this country, I think what will eventually happen, I think, as I said earlier, I think we're very cyclical in our way of thinking. And right now, beginning with his first term and now his second term, Trump has become his message has become very, very popular. It's us first. It's make America great. This is a new beginning, and a lot of people who supported this and are now going to be able to see whether or not this is actually going to benefit their everyday lives. I'm thinking, for example, um, we had a huge hurricane that came up from the south through Florida and then hit the Carolinas. And it just devastated this whole area of North
Hmm.
Carolina that had never really had storms like this before. And this is an area that is of generally, middle class, people who are working class people, and they lost everything. They lost their homes, their towns, flooding, the total destruction, terrible. And after President Trump got elected, he visited the area and promised that he would rebuild. They would rebuild because these were people who generally supported him very much.
Yes, yes.
Trump banned signs everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. We were there
Nothing
in
has
Georgia
happened to
last
these.
year
They
in
were
October.
they've been living in tents and trailers. And to this date, there was just a report in the news the other day of some reporters that went down there. Nothing is happening. Why? Well, FEMA is being cut, the budgets are being reduced, there's not enough money to go around, and this is not a priority to rebuild these areas. So these people who felt, something was going to change here are probably going to see very little change. And
Hmm.
it's not that he doesn't want to help them. I'm not suggesting that he's not interested in helping them. I think the distractions of the times, what's going on around the world, his efforts to do the sort of the bigger global stuff is going to, and the cuts in government that Musk is implementing are going to really affect people, and not only affect them in terms of rebuilding, but it's going to affect them in terms of their Social Security, their medical care, Medicaid, and Medicare. So I think you're going to find that the reaction will be people will start pressing their Congress and pressing people in Congress and saying, unless you help us here and change this, we're going to need new representatives. So I think you're going to see Congress starting to react a little bit. And I suspect that he will lose. The House will probably change in the next election to a majority of Democrats. And I think you'll see a slowdown in some of these initiatives that he has.
Hmm. So we have to
And that's
survive 2
natural. That's
years.
natural in our politics. We saw
Yeah.
that with Clinton. We saw that with even with Obama. We've seen it. Certainly, we saw it with previous presidents, and we saw it with Reagan for sure.
Hmm. 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 Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Professor. I'd like to get maybe a few questions from the audience from Tatiana. She's been getting, I think, quite a few on the chat box. Tatiana, what seems particularly compelling as a question for Professor Westphal? You're on mute. Tatiana? Tatiana, do you have questions for Professor Westphal from our audience? Gee whiz. Where are the questions?
Sorry about that. Yes, I was experiencing myself some trouble between screens. Now, indeed, we have a few questions waiting there. Let me take the first one. Do you think that Trump is using his peace mediation efforts between Russia and Ukraine to get on Russia's good side and subsequently get closer to China in order to maintain more control? Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that. I think that he's playing a somewhat dangerous role here with respect to Russia, and I think eventually he wants to have a, a, a better, I wouldn't say better relationship, but a different relationship with China. And one way to do that would be to find some way to put China and Russia at odds. So I think he's going to, I think the strategy of some of his people anyway, as they're thinking about this, is to go actually in that direction. You know, but he's going to be challenged because something's going to have to give on Ukraine. The Europeans are quite adamant that this is not going to be resolved by basically giving Russia everything it wants, and they're willing to stand up. At least from what I read and hear, you're closer to it, all of you there. But I regard what Europe is doing as pretty significant in
Mm-hmm.
support for Ukraine and pushing back on what Russia wants.
Well, using a U.S. analogy, the Europeans do see kind of a domino theory that if Ukraine goes, maybe the Baltic states are next, and
Sure.
whatever. So,
No question about it. No
yeah.
question about it.
Mhm.
So the
But,
next question, going back to the EU, how can European countries navigate Trump's shift from transatlantic relations? On one hand, it has heavily incentivized countries to invest more in European security and defense, which is believed to make the EU more independent and stronger in the long run. What could the drawbacks be for the US?
Well, I think we would have significant drawbacks from a move in which the European trade with Europe and commerce with Europe and banking and financial relations with Europe are not prioritized by us. I think for us that would be a pretty serious blow to our economy in the future. I think I'm not sure why. I'm not an economist and I'm not an expert on all this, but I see our economic connection to Europe as very significant to us. And I'm not sure why anybody would want to in any way disturb that relationship.
mhm.
And I think what you're seeing, even from countries that are not in Europe, like Australia and Japan, saying pretty clearly that if the United States imposes these kinds of tariffs and goes into this type of offensive, they're simply going to go walk away from that relationship and they're going to rebuild their own economies in a different way. And again, I think that's going to come back and hurt us.
Yeah, it's hard to maintain the dollar as a reserve currency for everybody
Yes,
if
exactly.
you're isolationist.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of our strongest,
it is by
most
far.
important variables.
Yeah. What else, Tatiana? Maybe one more.
Oh, many more. I think we can go slightly over the hour because we started with
Late.
delay and then we had these technical problems. So I hope that many of our participants can stay on for a little longer. Next question, do you see any positive changes for the US-Latin America relations in the near future due to the new US administration?
No, I don't see much change. I think it's been part of the U.S. policy for quite a long time to ignore Latin America as irrelevant. Biden was elected on the idea that he was going to, one of the things he said in his campaign, he was going to really invest in Central America and South America, not only on the immigration issue, but just in general, that we needed to rebuild our relationship with these countries and that he was going to travel and do extensive work there. And he did none of that.
Mhm.
The immigration thing got even worse because they didn't pay attention to it. And you can blame Congress that they didn't pass a bill and all that, but in the end, the administration policy on Latin America was a complete failure.
Mhm.
Our relationship with Mexico has not been as strong as it should be, as it needs to be. And so I don't see any change. I don't see that as uh, of any importance to the United States, which I think is really unfortunate because then these countries are trading. I was just in South America and you see the influence that China is having
Mhm.
economically in these countries. It's pretty
And in
significant.
Africa.
And in Africa, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the next question. As the Middle East affects the whole world in one way or another, do you see a more peaceful or a more volatile Middle East under Trump?
I actually see a little bit more of peaceful. I guess I don't know exactly what that would mean, but I think that one of the things that I do like about what the president's doing in the Middle East, outside of the Gaza Israel situation, what he's doing with countries like Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries and others, and now hopefully with Syria, is that he's paying more attention to them. He's focusing more on their economic future. He's focusing more on a better relationship with them. He's spending more efforts with them. I mean, taking these negotiations to Saudi Arabia, I think it's an important message to the Middle East. And I'm hopeful that Syria, which is still a terribly divided nation with so many different elements, both terrorist elements and different factions, can perhaps come back. And I think it's going to need our help to work with them on the sanctions that have been imposed to bring Syria back to a possible rebuilding. The Gaza situation, the Palestinian situation will remain, I think, a terrible problem into the future. I don't think there's a will to spend the kind of billions of dollars that's going to take to rebuild Gaza. I just don't know where that's going to end up. It's kind of a nightmare for everybody.
Mhm.
Now, something a little different. What is your opinion on the new White House website?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Neither have I. Have you, Ms. Westphal?
I did, but I did it at the very beginning of, so I don't, there may have been some changes that I'm not aware of. I didn't see anything different about it, other than a much greater focus on the president himself rather than the White House as a whole. Every other president has really sort of featured the different components in the White House, the National Security Council, the Economic Council, um, all of the various offices, the Council on Environmental Quality, all these offices that are part of the White House and extend the president's reach to all these areas that are important to people in America. I think there's more of a trend to focus more on just the president and his policies rather than, this extension of the White House abroad. But I haven't seen the very, very latest of it. Now I'm intrigued. I'm going to go look at it right after this meeting.
Plan of the day.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. With the current situation, how do you view Trump's authoritarian style and the possibility he would keep power once his term is finished?
Yeah, I don't think so. I have great faith in our system of government and generally in our people. I mean, I think that people who have been fed up with government inefficiency, and I think the large number of people that voted for him saw a government in the past that it was not responsive to their needs, to their economic needs, to basically the bread and butter kinds of things that people need. And I think what's going to happen is that's going to start changing over the next few years, the next couple of years. You're going to see some changes in the congressional makeup, and I think you're going to see a president who will probably want to, more than anything, um, be able to leave with a fairly decent reputation. And so I think I don't see him trying to become you know, I don't see him like Roosevelt, who wanted to have more terms and wanted to extend his presidency. I think he'll leave office voluntarily.
Okay, I have basically 4 more questions sitting here, all of them very important. Are you up for it?
Sure.
Do you think that the new general licenses 41B suspending Chevron's operations in Venezuela indirectly imply intentions to do business with Russian oil?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think he's probably going to lift that. He's probably going to allow Chevron to continue to work with Venezuela. I think they're going to lift that. No, I don't think that.
Cheap oil. If that's his goal, that's the closest one.
Yeah. Then the next question, do you think he is rushing with implementing all of these policies because he knows that he will soon lose the support of the House? How will his trajectory change in the following months?
Yeah, I think there's probably some of that. I think they probably are realistic to the fact that there's going to be some change. There has been change even with presidents who didn't take these kinds of very strong measures. the electorate just gets to the point where they need change, and members of Congress aren't responding fast enough, so they vote him out. I think he will try to cement some things in that, hopefully will, for his sake, hopefully will not be changed by a future Congress. And he's going to work hard on that, and we'll see how that works out. I can't imagine that if he doesn't do something about protecting Social Security and protecting Medicare, and particularly those two, that he could sustain anything in the future. Well, people will just really, really be very vocal and very active in opposition if he doesn't protect those two things, which he has said he will. But right now, with the cuts that Musk has forced, there's reports every day that the Social Security Administration and Medicare people don't have enough staff, can't work the issues. People are calling in, they can't get out phones, can't get their questions responded to. They're not getting their paychecks in time. So this is going to really be a big problem. Medicaid, which is the aid to the poor, obviously that's an area where people have less of a voice, and because it's the poor element in our country, and hopefully they are not going to take as big a hit either. But I don't think he's intending on eliminating those programs. I think they're just weakening them because of what these cuts. And that's the other thing. I mean, I think people are going to start having real reactions to having a person like Elon Musk, who doesn't answer to anybody, doesn't respond to Congress in any way, have the kind of power he has. I think you'll see probably the president, remove some of that power from him, or eventually move him out of that position.
That's a conflict of egos already. So from that perspective, it may blow up at some point.
Well, that's a good point, because the president, wants to make sure that he's seen as the president, and that Musk is not seen as the president.
Yeah, and there's
And
enough.
I don't blame him for that. If I was in his shoes, I'd feel the same way.
Yeah, there's enough cartoons on that.
Memes all over the place.
Yeah.
So the next one is less a question than a comment. I think Trump is bringing Russia to our side, the opposite of what Nixon did. So for some time, he doesn't care about Europe. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Bringing Russia to whose side?
I don't know. That's
the U.S. side, I guess.
probably the US side.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he may be enamored with the power that a Putin has, or an Erdogan, or some of these authoritarian leaders, Xi and others. He may be enamored with the power because he'd like to have that kind of independent power in this country as well to get his agenda through. But I don't think that he sees Putin as a real partner, as someone he can work with, as someone he can trust. I just don't see that. I think I just don't see it. I think the Europeans have insulted his ego, and have pushed back, and that's not something he likes. But I don't think he's going to walk away from that at all. Not in favor of Putin and Russia.
Okay,
maybe as a counter, a little bit of a counter to China, to try to get China to work with us a little bit closer. Maybe that might be a strategy, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the last question from Linda. Actually, it's two smaller questions. How does Trump get away with so many issues relating to conflict of interest, starting with the Trump coin, Melania coins? And then the second question is, do you see any new leaders in the Democratic Party to bring them back together?
Yeah, on the conflict of interest, one of the things that they have done is essentially eliminated all of the offices or people who would likely be the ones who would investigate and and put a check onto these conflicts of interest. Inspector generals were all fired in all of the departments. The investigative arms at Treasury and at Commerce are pretty much gone. So basically, if you eliminate the people who basically go after the conflicts of interest, then it's not just him. It's anybody can get away with things. I served in government for almost 35 to 40 years, and I had to be meticulous in my behavior, but also in never accepting gifts, never, doing things that would in any way uh, bring me into the situation where I was, creating a conflict of interest for myself. I had to be really careful. And I would force my staff to police me. My staff had to say, no, Mr. Secretary or Ambassador, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. And empower them to make sure that I didn't make a mistake and do something that would eventually get me into trouble. I don't think that mentality works anymore. I think that people are doing pretty much a lot of what they can get away with, which is really unfortunate because it creates a situation where there is no check and balance. I think it'll be restored, but it's going to take some time. And so I think it's very easy to do the things and he's not, I mean, I'm not saying it's suggesting the president is doing all kinds of corrupt things. I'm just saying that people can do things now that would normally be prohibited and get away with it.
And the second part of the question, do you see any new leaders in the Democratic Party to bring them back together?
There are a lot of really good leaders there, as there are very good Republican leaders as well. More moderate leaders. But I think everybody is there's a few that are sort of emerging. The senator from Connecticut, a couple of House members from here and there, a few governors. But I think it's going to take some time for the Democrats to coalesce. They are also very fractured. You have what they call the progressive wing of the party, um, and they've been the ones that have that people in some way blame for what Trump is doing with the whole business of woke and all of that they went too far. Um, but the Democrats have lost over time because of reapportionment and everything else, have lost the center in their party, or it's been reduced pretty significantly. The moderate Democrat is hard to find. And so that's got to be rebuilt. And that means that the leaders that have to emerge have to be, folks that are kind of on the moderate side, not the progressive side, or the Democrat parties continue to be attacked as just the party of the left and not the party of the center, which is where the Democratic Party needs to be. And the Republican Party the same way. The Republican has lost the moderates, the same as the Democrats. And so they've gone to further to the right. And there needs to be a stronger moderate. The thing that Trump had, excuse me, Reagan, when I was there, you had a Republican Party that had a very strong center and a Democratic Party that had a very strong center. And when Reagan was first elected, I was working in the Congress on the Budget Committee, and we were, and I was working for the majority at that time. I was working for the Democrats, and we were very concerned about some of the Trump policies. And it's sort of the moderates of both parties were the ones that came together and eventually pushed back on a lot of Reagan's policies that were so popular at the very beginning. But it was that moderate group that got together and was able to coalesce. You don't have that anymore. And
Yeah.
unless that gets rebuilt, it's going to be really difficult, because who's going to succeed Trump? Probably someone like J.D. Vance, who has the same kind of thinking, or same, will come maybe with some of the same ideas. And unless the Republicans have a moderate wing that can put a check, not to suggest that he shouldn't be the next president, just that there needs to be some checks and balances. And the best checks and balances are a moderate group of Democrats and Republicans that can hold the center today. This country has always operated best from the center. And it's when we stray to the right or to the left, which we have done historically many, many times, it's when we get into trouble.
Yeah.
A quick last question from me. Do you see Elon Musk running for president?
No,
No,
he
I
was
don't.
born, he can't. He wasn't born in the US.
Yeah.
Lucky
Okay.
us.
Well,
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's his ambition. You know, I think I think he's obviously a very good businessman and very a pretty important entrepreneur. You know, and I think at some point he'll miss that and go back to focusing on that more than anything else.
okay. Thank you very much, Professor Westphal. Linda, Ramon, any famous last words before
Famous
I
last
close?
words. Like last time I listened to Professor Westphal, I go from bewildered to slightly optimistic. But you know, with all the turmoil that we have around us in geopolitics nowadays, I think mildly optimistic is pretty good. And thank you for that, Professor Westphal.
I do believe in our system of checks and balances. I do believe in our ability to rebound from these things. And you're already seeing that a little bit with the courts,
Mm-hmm.
especially the Supreme Court with the Chief Justice speaking, criticizing the president publicly for what he said about this judge that opposed the sending of these Venezuelans to El Salvador. So you're seeing a court. I think you're still going to have 2 or 3 members of the court, you know, very conservative who will support Trump no matter what. But I think you're going to see even his new folks that he nominated and got confirmed the last time not go along with a lot of this stuff. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, I have faith in that system. Now the question is, will the country hold the president accountable? Will the Congress eventually hold him accountable? Will Republicans in the Congress hold him accountable if he refuses to abide by the decisions of the court or the decisions of Congress? That's the real key. If that doesn't happen, then we're in trouble. Forget about you Europeans. You'll be in good shape. We'll be in trouble.
Okay.
Linda,
Linda,
you're
you're
on mute,
mute.
Linda.
I think you wanted to say something there. I see you waving.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to thank you, Joe, once again. It's wonderful having you with us and with all of your wisdom and your experience and sharing with us your knowledge. That we thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Ramon. Thank you. It's been very enjoyable getting to chat with you too, and you're more than capable of just actually doing this all by yourself. You have a great sense of things. But I will tell you that you know, I've spent most of my career. I worked in Congress and for various presidents, Democrats and Republicans, and I am always optimistic, and I will continue to be optimistic. And I don't find President Trump to be a totally negative in my view. And I usually, some of my friends, when I was in Washington this week, some of my friends who are just thinking the world is coming to an end, got mad at me because I said, how could you give him credit for anything? Well, there are things that he's doing that I think will make some sense and maybe needed to be done. And so I will continue to think in a positive way.
Very good. On that note, I'm sure that we could go on for another hour, but it is unfortunately time to wrap it up. Thank you for allowing us to go over the time. Our apologies once again for the technical problems we were experiencing, which could fortunately then be repaired for a better quality of audio and visual. I would like to thank our speaker, Professor Joseph Westphal, for sharing his in-depth knowledge of the political situation in Washington and the longer-term repercussions that we may expect at so many levels for the United States and the rest of the world. It was a great honor to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you.
A big thank you.
Thank you all.
A big thank you also to our moderator, Ramon Esteve, for preparing this webinar. Your questions were of great relevance and you managed to cover many topics that in one way or another concern all of us. Thank you, Linda, also for sharing and for being with us today. Dear viewers, it was a great pleasure to see all of you connect today. I trust you found our webinar inspiring and the discussion valuable for you. Hopefully you will join us again on the next occasion. Till then, all the best, be safe and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.